Okay, so the next question I want to ask is about sequencing. In some work that we've been doing recently, we've looked at sequencing of the curriculum, and it links to the question that Kim asked around the carousels. Sometimes sequencing can be lost within D&T, and what I mean by that is, you've alluded to it earlier, where we have students at Key Stage 1 and 2 doing some brilliant stuff, and then at Key Stage 3, they come into Year 7, they almost take a little step back sometimes. And we're seeing that more and more, certainly with the improved provision at primary schools. We see it in subjects like computer science, where kids are doing Scratch and all sorts of cool programming language, and then they come into Year 7 and they drop down a little bit. So it is not just a D&T challenge. But sequencing seems to be a real issue for D&T, simply because if you look at maths, the children go through a sequence curriculum, and each year builds on the next, each lesson builds on the next, and you can track their progress over time through topics and subjects in areas of knowledge. In D&T, potentially the carousel system could be the reason why this is the case. We almost start a project, do a project, end a project, and then we might move it to a new teacher, and we start again. So now you're going to do new research. Now you're going to do a new design approach, but actually you're not building on the skills that you applied or developed last time around. So sequencing seems to be a real challenge here. Obviously, knowing that the programs of study for 1 to 2 and to Key Stage 3 came from you, what does good sequencing look like in D&T?
Well, again, you need to look at the program of study, because what that actually does is give a series of principles and things that you need to try and teach to the students, but each key stage builds on the last one. So you need to go right back to Key Stage 1 and look at the principles there, and then think, right, well, what happens at Key Stage 2? What is it extra that we need to add into those basic principles? And when you look at that and you think about sequencing, what you need to go back is to, what is Key Stage 1 asking you to do? What is the program of study asking you to do? And building on that right throughout, so that students, or pupils, when they come to you at Key Stage 3, are familiar with a lot of that terminology, even though it's slightly different. And I go back to what I was saying to Kim about designing, if you've got a carousel, working together to design those principles or those core skills. And that's what it is. It's a set of core skills from Key Stage 1, 2 and 3. But what are those skills and how do you develop them? So, awarding bodies should be a bit more alert to looking at what those core skills should be and what they should look like, so that you can have a sequence diagram to say, this is how you progress. Obviously, the program of study is just a kind of a series of events, but you could do that, or any awarding body should be working on those things, or the professional bodies should be. Rather than providing exemplar materials, rather than providing exemplar projects, go back to basic principles, because that's what teachers want to know. If you go back to primary, a lot of teachers in primary have very little design and technology training whatsoever. And I always think there's a very big job for teachers to do, to actually, secondary teachers should be going into primary to actually upskill some of these teachers and just work together. I have done that in Suffolk with an academy group, where we got everybody together and we worked on a set of common assignments. We all developed the assignments together. I mean, obviously it wasn't the answer, it was a couple of days, and then I went back and evaluated them, but it's a start. So I do think that sequencing is there for a reason. It's the whole kind of design and make and evaluate and research, etc., the design process. But upskilling and using tools and equipment better and more of is the logical way that it's been written. But I do think, if you think about it, at the end of Key Stage 1, you'll have a different teacher in Key Stage 2 because they're different year groups. So there is an element that I think the awarding bodies should be a little bit sharper on, to help staff to do that.
Well, one of the examples I think I've seen in schools, which I thought was quite neat and quite nice, was I think a department had looked at different ways in which materials are shaped, formed, processed and finished, and brought them back to very simple principles. So the idea that cutting out a shape from a piece of material starts with scissors and paper. and then it progresses into a craft knife, and then it progresses into a CNC controlled cutter, and then it moves on to a laser cutter, plasma cutter, etc. So you can see a tangible sequence between those steps to cut shapes out, and what each process adds to the previous. And then of course with scissors you could go off into kind of shearing and metal cutting and stamping and embossing, etc. And you could see a tangible plan over time. And I think that makes sense, and I think you can then apply that to other aspects of design, for example, on how design progresses and becomes more complicated and nuanced and more kind of expertise as the child becomes older and more capable of designing different challenges. And again, linking that to the locality, as we've mentioned, would make sense.